Oh, I don't have to move anymore because this is now a span. That's nice. Now, if we are doing a stood move on dynamic, it's just going to invalidate the whole object or just the data inside of it? Is it okay if I can I add to it next time around? Let's try it and see. Okay, so in this case, we just want to rebuild the static entities and that means, okay, so let's see what happens here. I think we actually have a bug here. So if in the case where we have dynamic, we are sorting by static. Static renderers are dirty. Let's say they're not dirty, because this is our first time through. Then we also need to rebuild, we need to populate the dynamic entity cache once. Okay. Let's see there. You know what, we can just set our dirty flag to not be if static has changed, but to be if any entity has changed. Let's rename this to is, you know, I just can't name my booleans R when we're dealing with plurals, but I hate seeing this. Is static renderers. Yuck. Oh, I was going to rename it and I got distracted. Is renderers dirty? And this really wasn't on add static anyway, but I thought that that'd be cleaner, easier to understand if we called it on add static, but now we're just doing a full wholesale on add remove. So let's call it what it is. Okay, so we want this to be just unequivocally true. Same here. Okay, so now whenever a mesh renderer is added or removed, we're going to rebuild all of the static entities. Yeah, I don't really like that, but what else could we do here? Let's rename this all over the place first. So we get a signal here whenever whenever an entity has been, or whenever a mesh renderer has been added to the scene or removed from the scene. And that's what these signals are. And what we're trying to do is build a state of all of our renderers. But if the renderer is static, we don't want to rebuild it every time unless it is changed. We're going to have to, this is our model matrix vector, so we're going to have to rebuild all the dynamic ones in every frame. But we don't necessarily want to rebuild all of our statics because they won't have changed unless they've been added or removed. Now the problem here is we have an overload to this class where we can choose either to static sort or not, so that we can benchmark later on. Now if we're not sorting by static, we just unequivocally get all of the static or dynamic renderers, get their transforms, and pass them along. But in the case where we are, we're just ignoring this case entirely. So let's look at this here. So if a renderer has been added or removed, we want to rebuild the static entity cache. Dynamic entity cache will be empty here. So then we first populate our statics. And it will be empty the first time through. It'll be empty now. And then we build up our dynamic entity cache. But we're going to want to clear this guy too. But we do here. Yeah, we always want to clear it. So it's already clear. I wonder if we move this inside this call, then we also need to clear our renderer cache, or dynamic renderer cache. Okay, so we run through in the case where we are sorting by static. If the renderers are dirty, then we want to rebuild the static entities and the dynamic entities, so we need to clear both sets. I really need a helper method because this is nasty. We can deal with that after tests. Okay, so we want to clear the statics and the dynamics. Then this case is good, because we're going to rebuild the entire static entity cache and rebuild the entire dynamic entity cache. Throw the statics towards the beginning of the dynamics and ship them out. And that's good because we're going to wipe them clean. Now in the case where renderers are oh shoot. Maybe I did want them to be called just care if the static renderers are dirty. Let's think. Okay, let's say that this only gets flagged when the static renderers are dirty. So if the static renderers have not changed, our dynamic entity list will have both sets in there, so we definitely want to clear that out. We want to rebuild dynamic every time. Now, in the case of static, they're not dirty, but there's nothing in there because this is the first time through. So we want to say So if the renderers are dirty, we are going to rebuild both sets, but if they're not dirty, the static renderers are not dirty. I hate to go back and change those after I just renamed them again. But let's see what we want to do here. If the renderers are not dirty, they haven't changed, but it might be our first time through, so we definitely need to rebuild the dynamic entities. And we're going to need to rebuild the static entities if it's their first time through. So let's see here. If static entity cache is empty, then we want to we just need 4 cases. So if the static entity cache is not dirty, if the renders are not dirty, but the static entity cache is empty, we still want to rebuild both. So we can just put that here. If renderers are not dirty, or static entity cache empty. Or if they are dirty, or if the cache is empty, then we know we want to rebuild both. So now we know there's something in our cache if we have something to have there. So I think we're getting it going now. Now we know we have items in our static list already, if there was anything to be added. So we do clear the dynamics, and we only push the dynamic entities back in. So we do this here, as we just cleared it. We don't want to, goodness sake. I'm not going to clear and reserve every entity. So, okay. We're rolling now. If the entity isn't static, we want to pop it into our dynamic list, and now we will have items in our static list from this guy, so we can simply just combine and return. Yikes, that was a lot. Okay, I do believe that's what we want to do. Unfortunately, we should go back and rename our statics, because we don't want to do this if, oh, and I never, yeah, we got to go change that logic, because we only want to flag if static renderers are dirty. Let's see if that's true. No. Say we are, maybe that isn't true. So we have 5 entities, none of them are static. We are sorting by static, so we just ignore this case entirely. So we say this is, if they start with dirty false, which I think they do. I don't know if that initial add would flag it or not. Well, in the case where they start false, so they are not dirty, we would land here, except that our entity cache would be empty, so we'll build both. And then, very important step here, we want to call right before we jump out is renders dirty equals false. Alright, let's first see if we can build. It's an important step. Oh yeah, let's change these guys back. I'm going to keep this name just add remove render because that's truly what's happening, how we handle it. We can keep this, change this back to static render or dirty though. So the signal itself isn't actually just getting emitted if a static renderer has been added. It's getting emitted every time a renderer has been added or removed. So let's name that appropriately. But we only want to set the Boolean if the entity that we added or removed is static. So to jump back over to the subsystem. Do we need to fix our names at all? No. Nice. Oh. We're cruising into day 4 of trying to get this logic written. But I think we're there. Our tests will tell us as soon as we write them. I think I left off last stream right before having written the tests, but what we did is we added just a little test fixture, an ECS fixture that Cal made that mocks out our ECS, which is really handy. Then just made a little shared test data here, and we have our first test, and what it does is it makes 5 tune renderers for us, and then we need to call and then just make sure that, well, we're not actually asserting anything right now. We're just seeing that it compiles appropriately and runs without blowing up. But the intention here is we're going to add 5 tune renderers, call the overload, call the constructor that does not have static sorting, build the thing and then make sure that we have 5 items in there in both of the vectors that we return. So world not oh no. So I was going to commit these resources. Let's look at the camera subsystem. How do we do that? Get test world in place. Well, so when I was doing this the other day, I found that our ECS says that we don't have any resources in there yet because we need to commit them. So I need to figure out how we do that. Probably in component registry, register, get pool, get component pools, commit pending changes. That's the one. So to call that, we need to get the test component registry. Again, we do not want to do that in the loop. So world dot test. Oh no, I think it's just a get to test component registry because we inherit from the ECS. Can commit pending changes. I never know if you use this fluent syntax here in C++ if it makes a copy, or how you can find that out just to be safe. It probably does. C++ has a lot of shenanigans like that. Registry equals test component registry. Okay, let's see what we've got cooking. Well, it succeeded, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. Let's make sure that our state looks like we want it to, and then I can start adding some assertions. But that is a step in the right direction. Okay. Oops. What's the size? Oh, they're in there. Nice. Object count is 5. So, not sort by static, that's where we're at. Clear dynamics. So we're going to step through this logic and make sure it's doing what we are intending. Clearing the dynamics. Now, popping all the dynamics into our dynamic cache of model matrices. There are 5 of you in there. So far, so good. Putting the 5 in the dynamic entity cache. Looks good. And then returning a pair. Awesome. Okay, now let's here. I've never used a structured binding unpacker syntax outside of the context of a loop. Does this work? I would assume it does. So auto and render state entities equals. Let's call them actual entities. Let's call them actual render state. Oh, of course. Hey. Ooh. Why you gotta go and be double ampersand on me? Nah, dog. Consider my level of C++ to be pretty okay on move semantics, but when it comes to is it an R value reference or a universal reference, God only knows. Wherever that puts me. Alright, let's just see what happens if we build. Debug. Why would that be? Okay, what are we expecting to return? Model matrices and entities, which is an alias for a stood pair of object render state and entity. What am I not getting about? Okay, did I take that breakpoint off? I did. Good. Must be a universal reference. Why? If anyone's watching this in the future and can tell me why it's a universal reference, I would love to know. Let's see if I can find out myself. Let's see. I feel like I always have to brace myself before jumping on cppreference.com. The information's in there, but can I get it out? Okay, an alias does not have to be a reference type. Ref qualifier. Would a stood pair fall under this category? Okay. For each identifier, variable whose type is reference to stood tuple element i.e. type. If L value reference, if its corresponding initializer is an L value or an R value reference, otherwise. Get I. Oh, I see, just concept constrained, okay. Okay, we have my exact case here, ignoring the template and the concept. No information was taken. Notes for future me to dig into later once I get to the level of being able to parse CPP reference outside of the examples. Okay, so now let's actually test this bugger. So we are in the case where we are not sorting by static, so we just want to make sure that, what's the syntax? Expect EQ actual render state dot model matrices dot size equal is 5. We want to make sure that the actual entities dot size is 5. And that's about it for now. Now, in test 2, let's say that we are build state, we are static sorting. And how do we set these entities to static? Oh, and the other to do I have is we want to hook up the signal for. We want to hook up the signal for when static entities have been rebuilt. I will be right back.